The grandfather clock in the Ashford Mansion's marble foyer chimed 6:47 a.m. as Maya Delacroix adjusted the silver serving tray one final time. Steam rose from the bone china teacups carrying the aroma of Earl Grey through the silent corridors. She'd been awake since 4:30, the same routine for the past 8 years. Polish the silver, arrange the flowers, prepare breakfast for people who barely acknowledged her existence. The October rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, each drop catching the light from the crystal chandelier. Maya paused, watching the water streak down the glass, remembering another rainy morning years ago when her grandmother had taught her to find dignity in any honest work. "Hold your head high, child," the old woman had whispered. "They can take your wages, but they can't take your worth." Heavy footsteps echoed from the grand staircase. Richard Ashford III descended slowly, his silk robe flowing behind him like a royal cape. Behind him came his wife Vivian, her platinum blonde hair already perfectly styled despite the early hour. And trailing them both, their 15-year-old son Camden, earbuds dangling from his neck phone glued to his palm. Maya lowered her eyes and stepped aside, invisible as furniture. The family swept past her toward the dining room, their expensive cologne mixing with the scent of the roses she'd arranged at dawn. She followed silently, carrying their breakfast, her rubber-soled shoes whispering against the Italian marble. The dining room gleamed under the morning light. 24 chairs surrounded a mahogany table that could seat half of Maya's old neighborhood. Oil paintings of long-dead Ashfords gazed down from silk-covered walls, their stern faces seeming to judge everyone who entered their domain. "The coffee's cold," Vivian announced without tasting it, her voice sharp as winter wind. "How many times must I tell you the temperature should be exactly 145 degrees? Maya's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "I'll bring fresh coffee immediately, Mrs. Ashford." Camden snorted, looking up from his phone for the first time. Maybe she should get a thermometer. Oh wait, can she even read numbers? The cruelty hit Maya like a physical blow, but she kept her face neutral. In the corner of her vision, she caught a glimpse of David Castellanos through the window. The new landscaper was pruning the hedges near the pool house, his movements efficient and precise. Something about his steady presence had always calmed her nerves during difficult moments. "Hi, Camden, darling," Vivian said with amusement rather than reproach. "Don't be naughty." Maya hurried to the kitchen, her hands trembling as she prepared fresh coffee. The servants' quarters buzzed with quiet morning activity. Rosa the cook glanced up from kneading bread dough. "Todo bien, Maya." "Si está bien," Maya replied, though everything was far from fine. Returning with the steaming coffee pot, Maya moved carefully around the table. As she reached Camden's place, setting, the teenager suddenly pushed back his chair. The wooden leg caught Maya's ankle, sending her stumbling forward. Hot coffee sloshed over the rim of the pot, splashing onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Oops," Camden said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Clumsy much?" Vivian's fork clinked against her plate. "Really, Maya? We have guests coming for brunch in 3 hours. I can't have stained linens." "I'll change it immediately," Maya said, rushing to clean the spill. "You know what?" Camden's voice grew louder, more theatrical. "I'm bored. This morning needs some excitement." He pulled out his phone, switching to video mode. The red recording light blinked like a warning beacon. "I've got an idea for my social media, something that'll really get some views." Maya's stomach dropped. She recognized that look in Camden's eyes, the same expression he'd worn when he'd accidentally broken the Ming vase and blamed it on her, when he'd hidden his mother's jewelry and suggested Maya had stolen it, when he'd pushed the neighbor's cat into the pool and watched it struggle. "Maya," Camden commanded, his voice taking on an edge that made the room feel smaller. "Come here." Maya approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the window, she could see David had stopped his work. He stood perfectly still, one hand shading his eyes as he looked toward the house. "Get down on your hands and knees," Camden ordered, holding his phone steady. "I want you to crawl around the table." The words hit Maya like ice water. Excuse me. You heard me. Down like a dog. I'm making a funny video. Don't you want to be famous? Maya's throat went dry. Camden, I don't think... Do it, he interrupted, his voice cracking like a whip. Or I'll tell Dad you've been stealing from Mom's jewelry box again. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Maya knew Camden's word carried weight in this house. She'd seen 3 staff members fired in the past month alone, all because of Camden's lies and manipulations. Vivian sipped her coffee, watching with detached curiosity. Richard barely looked up from his newspaper. No one spoke up. No one objected. With trembling hands, Maya lowered herself to the cold marble floor. The surface bit into her knees through her uniform. Shame burned through every nerve as she began to crawl, Camden following her with his camera, laughing as she circled the massive table. And now bark, Camden commanded. Like a big dog, make it loud. Maya's vision blurred as she forced out a weak sound. Each movement felt like shedding another layer of her humanity. Her throat closed as tears threatened to spill. Louder, Camden demanded, and wag your tail. Through her humiliation, Maya caught another glimpse of David through the window. He had moved closer, his face grim as he carefully positioned himself to capture the scene through his own phone, though he kept it hidden from view. This is hilarious, Vivian laughed. Camden, you must send me that video. Already posting it, Camden replied, his fingers flying over his screen. This is going to break the internet. Maya crawled another lap around the table, each second stretching into eternity. Her work uniform was getting dirty from the floor and her knees ached from the hard surface. But worse than any physical discomfort was the crushing weight of degradation pressing down on her chest. Now sit up and beg for a treat, Camden ordered, holding up a croissant. The dining room erupted in laughter as Maya rose onto her knees, her hands positioned like paws. The croissant hit her shoulder as Camden threw it, causing fresh peals of amusement from the family. Outside, David's face was stone as he continued recording, his jaw clenched tight. Somehow, knowing that someone was witnessing this with sympathy rather than cruel amusement gave Maya the strength to endure. Good doggy, Camden cooed mockingly. Now roll over. Maya closed her eyes, feeling something break inside her chest. But beneath the humiliation, beneath the shame, a small flame of anger began to burn. This couldn't continue. This wouldn't continue. She had no idea that within hours her world would change forever. The servants' quarters felt suffocating as Maya sat on her narrow bed, still wearing her stained uniform. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Notifications from social media platforms she'd never joined. Somehow Camden's video had already found its way online, shared and reshared by strangers who saw her humiliation as entertainment. He made crawls like dog for rich family. Hilarious. Entitled brat makes help bark, she actually did it, LMAO. Rich kids these days are savage. Each comment felt like another slap. Maya's hands shook as she scrolled through hundreds of laughing emojis and fire reactions. In less than 3 hours, the video had been viewed over 50,000 times. A soft knock interrupted her spiral of shame. Maya, David's voice came through the thin door. Can we talk? She opened the door to find him holding 2 cups of coffee from the kitchen, his landscaper's uniform still damp from the morning rain. His dark eyes held none of the amusement she'd seen in the dining room. Only quiet fury and something that looked like respect. I saw what happened, he said, simply handing her a cup. All of it. They sat in the small common area adjacent to the staff quarters. David pulled out his phone, showing her a video he'd recorded through the dining room windows. Unlike Camden's mocking footage, this one captured the full context. The family's cruel laughter. Maya's obvious distress, the systematic humiliation. I used to be a paralegal, David said quietly. Well, that's another story, but I know the law. What they did to you isn't just wrong, it's illegal. Workplace harassment, creation of a hostile environment, possibly even assault. Maya stared at the video, seeing herself from the outside for the first time. The police won't care. The Ashfords donate to every campaign in this county. Then we go higher. State labor board, federal agencies, civil rights organizations. David's voice carried a conviction that surprised her. I've been documenting things since I started working here. Safety violations, wage discrepancies, threats against other staff members. He opened a notes app on his phone showing months of carefully recorded incidents. Dates, times, witnesses, a pattern of abuse that went far beyond today's humiliation. "Ooh, why?" Maya asked. "Why would you risk your job for this?" David was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "Because I've been where you are now. Different circumstances, but I know what it feels like to be powerless while powerful people destroy your life for sport." As evening approached, they worked together in David's small apartment above the pool house. The space was sparse but organized. Law books on makeshift shelves, a laptop on a folding table, photographs of a woman and young girl tucked discreetly in a corner. "My sister and niece," David explained, catching Maya's glance. "They're the reason I can't just walk away from injustice anymore." They spent hours crafting their strategy. David helped Maya document every incident she could remember. The false accusations, the wage theft, the casual cruelty. They created secure email accounts, researched civil rights attorneys, and prepared to file complaints with multiple agencies simultaneously. "The key is coordination," David explained. "If we hit them from multiple angles at once, they can't contain it." Maya's phone buzzed. Another notification from Camden's viral video, now approaching 200,000 views. But this time, the tone of comments had shifted slightly. Mixed in with the mockery were voices of outrage. "This is actually really messed up. That poor woman. This isn't funny. Rich people are literally psychopaths. Someone should report this family." "You look," David pointed to the screen. "People are starting to see the truth. Your dignity in that moment, even while they tried to strip it away, it's coming through." They worked until dawn, building their case methodically. David's legal training proved invaluable as he helped Maya understand the process, the potential outcomes, the risks they faced. "They'll retaliate," he warned. "Rich families like the Ashfords have lawyers on speed dial. They'll try to discredit you, maybe even file countersuits." Maya nodded, feeling steadier than she had in years. "I've been invisible for so long, maybe it's time to be seen." As the sun rose over the manicured gardens, they prepared to set their plan in motion. Neither of them knew that across town in her downtown apartment, investigative journalist Rebecca Santos was already watching Camden's video with professional interest. Recognizing something bigger than a spoiled teenager's cruel prank. Act 3, the parallel investigation. Rebecca Santos had built her career on stories that others missed. The human cost of corporate greed, the systematic oppression hiding behind charitable facades. At 38, she'd won 2 Pulitzers for exposing corruption in places where no one thought to look. The video of Maya crawling and barking had crossed her desk through a tip line buried among dozens of daily submissions. But something about it nagged at her. She'd grown up in a house where her mother cleaned for wealthy families, had heard stories whispered over late-night dinners about the casual cruelty of people who had too much money and too little conscience. "This isn't just about one incident," she murmured to her editor Martin Chen as they watched the video for the 3rd time. "Look at the family's reaction. This is routine for them." Martin adjusted his glasses, studying the footage. "Rich kid being an asshole isn't exactly front-page material, Becca." "No, but systematic abuse of domestic workers is. And if this family is doing it this openly, what are they hiding that's worse?" Rebecca spent the morning researching the Ashfords. What she found was a family empire built on real estate development, with projects spanning 3 states and hundreds of millions in government contracts. Richard Ashford III served on the boards of 2 major charities and had received humanitarian awards for his commitment to economic development in underserved communities. The public image was pristine, too pristine. She drove to the Ashford estate that afternoon, her camera equipment hidden in what looked like a casual messenger bag. The mansion sat on 15 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, its neo-Georgian architecture proclaiming old money and older arrogance. Rebecca parked across the street using a telephoto lens to capture the daily rhythms of the house. Workers came and went through service entrances, their heads down, movements hurried. She photographed license plates, documented arrival and departure times, built a picture of the household's operations. Around 3 p.m., she spotted something unusual. A young woman in a housekeeper's uniform, the same woman from the viral video McClard, was loading boxes into an old Honda Civic. She moved quickly, constantly glancing back at the house as if afraid of being caught. Rebecca followed at a distance as the Honda drove to a modest apartment complex on the east side of town. The woman, Maya, according to Rebecca's research, climbed the stairs to a second-floor unit carrying what looked like her personal belongings. Evicted, Rebecca realized. They fired her and had her evicted. That evening, Rebecca sat in her car outside Maya's apartment building, debating whether to approach. Journalists had to be careful with victims of abuse. Pushing too hard could re-traumatize them or drive them underground entirely. She was still deciding when a familiar face appeared in her telephoto lens. David Castellanos, the Ashford's landscaper, was climbing the same stairs Maya had used earlier. He carried grocery bags and what looked like legal documents. Interesting, Rebecca thought. The help is organizing. She waited another hour before approaching, timing her arrival as David was leaving. In the apartment building's lobby, she caught him at the mailboxes. "Excuse me," she said, showing her press credentials. "I'm Rebecca Santos from the Tribune. I'd like to speak with Ms. Delacroix about what happened to her." David's expression immediately turned guarded. "She's been through enough. I know. I want to help." Rebecca pulled out her tablet, showing him articles she'd written exposing abuse in other wealthy households. "I don't exploit victims. I expose the systems that create them." David studied her credentials, then her face. Something in her expression must have convinced him because he nodded toward the stairs. "Apartment 2B, but if you hurt her, we'll know." Maya's apartment was small but spotless, filled with the scent of strong coffee and determination. She sat at a tiny kitchen table covered with printed emails, legal documents, and handwritten notes. Her eyes were red-rimmed but focused, her posture straight despite everything she'd endured. "Ms. Delacroix," Rebecca said gently. "I'm Rebecca Santos. I cover stories about workplace abuse and civil rights violations. I'd like to help you tell your story." Maya looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. "What kind of help?" Rebecca sat down across from her, noting the careful organization of Maya's documentation. "The kind that makes sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else. The kind that holds powerful people accountable for their actions." Over the next 2 hours, Maya told her story. Not just the crawling incident, but years of systematic abuse, stolen wages, false accusations, and daily humiliations. David provided legal context and additional documentation he'd gathered. Rebecca recorded everything with Maya's permission, her journalist's instincts recognizing the elements of a story that could spark national outrage. But she also saw something else. A woman who had found her voice and wasn't going to be silenced. "I want people to know," Maya said as the interview concluded. "Not just about me, but about Rosa and Miguel and all the others who are too scared to speak up. The Ashfords think we're disposable, but we're human beings with families and dreams and dignity." Rebecca packed up her equipment, already planning her investigation strategy. "This is going to take time to do right. The Ashfords will fight back, probably hard. Are you prepared for that?" Maya's smile was small but steel-reinforced. "I've been preparing my whole life." As Rebecca drove home, her mind raced with story angles and investigation plans. The viral video had been just the tip of the iceberg. Tomorrow she would start pulling at threads that would unravel an entire empire built on exploitation. But tonight, for the first time in years, Maya Delacroix would sleep knowing that someone with power was finally listening to her voice. The law offices of Blackstone, Hartwell and Associates occupied 3 floors of downtown's most prestigious building. Richard Ashford III sat in the senior partner's office, his usual composed demeanor cracked like old paint. Across from him, Margaret Blackstone reviewed a stack of legal documents with the cool efficiency that had made her the most feared attorney in the state. "The situation is manageable," Margaret said, her voice crisp as winter air. "But we need to move quickly. The video has been viewed over 1,000,000 times, and now there's a journalist sniffing around." Richard's jaw clenched. "Rebecca Santos. I know her reputation. She's destroyed better families than mine." "Not destroyed, exposed." Margaret's correction was pointed. "There's a difference, in understanding it will help us craft our response." She pulled out her phone, showing him a series of social media posts. "Your son's video has sparked a broader conversation about domestic worker abuse. Dignity for workers is trending, with thousands of people sharing their own stories." Vivian shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Surely this will blow over. These internet crazes always do." "Not this time," Margaret replied. "Ms. Delacroix has filed complaints with the Department of Labor, the EEOC, and the State Civil Rights Commission. She's also retained counsel, pro bono representation from the Workers' Rights Coalition." Richard stood abruptly, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "What do they want? Money? We can make this go away." "Actually, they don't want money," Margaret said, consulting her notes. "According to their initial demands, they want a public apology, systemic changes to your employment practices, and compensation for all affected workers. They're also demanding that Camden face consequences for his actions." "Absolutely not," Vivian snapped. "He's 15 years old. This will ruin his college prospects." Margaret's smile was thin as a blade. "Mrs. Ashford, your son's college prospects are the least of your concerns right now. Rebecca Santos has been interviewing former employees. She's building a pattern of abuse case that goes back years." She opened a folder spreading out photographs and documents. "Rosa Martinez terminated after she complained about unpaid overtime. Miguel Herrera fired when he refused to work in unsafe conditions. Elena Vasquez dismissed after she asked for time off to attend her daughter's graduation." Richard returned to his seat, his face pale. "Those were legitimate terminations, perhaps. But Ms. Santos has found 15 former employees willing to testify about similar treatment. She's also uncovered some interesting financial discrepancies." Margaret pulled out bank statements and tax documents. "Your company has been claiming tax deductions for charity work performed by unpaid domestic staff. The IRS tends to take a dim view of such creative accounting." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic far below. Richard's empire, built over decades of careful manipulation and exploitation, was beginning to crack. "What are our options?" he asked finally. "Limited," Margaret admitted. "We can fight this in court, but the video evidence is damning. We can try to discredit Ms. Delacroix, but that risks looking vindictive, or we negotiate. Admit wrongdoing, implement real changes, and hope the public's appetite for wealthy family scandals doesn't extend to actual criminal charges." Richard's phone buzzed with a text from his publicist. The Today Show wanted a statement. CNN was requesting an interview. TMZ had photographers camped outside the mansion's gates. "How did it come to this?" Vivian whispered. "It was just a silly video." Margaret's expression remained impassive. "Mrs. Ashford, when you treat human beings like animals for entertainment, there are consequences. The only question now is how severe those consequences will be." Meanwhile, across town in Rebecca Santos's cluttered apartment, a different kind of war room was taking shape. Her dining table had disappeared under stacks of documents, photographs, and legal files. Her laptop displayed a complex web diagram connecting the Ashfords to other wealthy families, business associates, and political figures. "The network is bigger than we thought," she told Maya and David over video call. "The Ashfords aren't isolated bad actors. They're part of a system that enables this kind of abuse. Maya's face on the screen was composed but determined. How many others? At least 40 families in 3 states, all using the same employment agency, all with similar patterns of worker complaints. And here's the kicker. The agency is owned by a shell company that traces back to Richard Ashford's cousin. David leaned into the camera frame. So they're not just abusing workers individually, they're running an organized system of exploitation. Rebecca nodded, which takes this from a local story about a spoiled rich kid to a federal investigation into human trafficking and labor law violations. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, the voice was familiar. Ms. Santos. This is Margaret Blackstone. I represent the Ashford family. We'd like to arrange a meeting to discuss a resolution to this unfortunate situation. Rebecca put the call on speaker. What kind of resolution? The kind that acknowledges mistakes were made while avoiding unnecessary legal proceedings that would benefit no one. Unnecessary. Rebecca's voice sharpened. Ms. Blackstone, your clients forced a woman to crawl on the floor and bark like a dog while they filmed it for entertainment. What part of that seems unnecessary to address? Oh, poor choice of words, Margaret conceded. What I meant was that we're prepared to make substantial changes to ensure this never happens again. Are you prepared to admit criminal wrongdoing? Are you prepared to face federal charges for labor law violations? Are you prepared to explain to a grand jury how a family worth hundreds of millions has been stealing wages from workers who make minimum wage? There was a long pause. We'll be in touch, Margaret said finally and hung up. Rebecca turned back to her computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard. They're scared, she told Maya and David. Really scared, which means we're over the target. But she also knew that scared, wealthy people were dangerous. The Ashfords would fight back, and they had resources Maya couldn't imagine. The real battle was just beginning. That night, as Maya lay in her new apartment, listening to sirens in the distance, she thought about her grandmother's words, "They can take your wages, but they can't take your worth." Tomorrow she would prove that worth wasn't just something you possessed. It was something you fought for. The Atlanta Federal Building buzzed with unprecedented activity. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray November sky like electronic flowers seeking signals. Protesters had gathered since dawn, holding signs reading "Dignity for Workers" and "Justice for Maya." Inside Courtroom 7, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Maya sat at the plaintiff's table wearing a navy blue dress that Rebecca Santos had helped her choose. Professional but not expensive, dignified but not intimidating. Her hands were folded in her lap, steady despite the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Across the aisle, the Ashford family sat behind a phalanx of lawyers. Richard's face was stone, but his hands betrayed his nervousness with their constant movement. Vivian dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though Maya suspected the tears were more strategic than genuine. Camden sat between his parents, looking younger than his 15 years in a conservative suit. Judge Patricia Williams, a stern African-American woman with 20 years on the federal bench, called the proceedings to order. The packed gallery fell silent. We are here today. Judge Williams began to address charges of systematic labor law violations, civil rights abuses, and conspiracy to defraud federal agencies. The United States versus Ashford Enterprises and the Ashford family. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Rivera, began with the video that had started it all. As Camden's cruel laughter filled the courtroom and Maya's humiliation played out on the large screen, a collective gasp rose from the gallery. But Rivera didn't stop there. He presented months of Rebecca Santos's investigation, the network of wealthy families, the shell companies, the systematic wage theft affecting hundreds of workers across 3 states. Bank records showed millions in stolen wages. Employment records revealed a pattern of firing workers who complained. Tax documents proved fraudulent charity claims. This isn't about one family's cruelty, Rivera told the jury. This is about an organized criminal enterprise that has exploited vulnerable workers for decades. When Maya took the stand, the courtroom fell absolutely silent. She spoke clearly and calmly, detailing years of abuse while maintaining her composure. When the defense attorney tried to rattle her with aggressive questioning, she responded with quiet dignity that made his attacks look petty and cruel. "You continue to work for the Ashfords despite these alleged abuses?" the defense attorney pressed. "Doesn't that suggest you weren't really being mistreated?" Maya's response was simple and devastating. "I worked because I needed to eat, because I had to pay rent, because in America even people with dignity sometimes have to endure indignity to survive. But surviving doesn't mean accepting." David testified about the documentation he'd gathered, the safety violations he'd witnessed, the culture of fear that pervaded the Ashford household. His legal background made him a credible witness, his calm professionalism contrasting sharply with the defense's attempts to paint him as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. Elena Vasquez, a former housekeeper who had been too frightened to speak out initially, had found courage in Maya's example. She testified about being forced to work 17-hour days without overtime, about having her passport confiscated, about being threatened with deportation when she complained. "Mrs. Ashford told me I was lucky to have a job," Elena said through tears. "She said people like me were replaceable. But watching Maya stand up made me realize we are not replaceable. We are human beings." One by one, 15 former workers testified. The pattern was undeniable, the evidence overwhelming. When Rebecca Santos took the stand as an expert witness, she walked the jury through the broader network of exploitation she'd uncovered. Her investigation had triggered federal investigations in 12 other cities, leading to 47 arrests and the shutdown of the fraudulent employment agency. "The Ashfords weren't just individual bad actors," she explained. "They were part of a sophisticated criminal network that treated human beings as commodities." The defense tried to paint Maya as an opportunist seeking attention and money. They brought in character witnesses to testify about the family's charitable work, their contributions to the community. But the video evidence was too powerful, the pattern of abuse too clear. During closing arguments, Rivera stood before the jury with quiet intensity. Maya Delacroix was forced to crawl on the floor and bark like a dog for the entertainment of people who saw her as less than human. But in that moment of ultimate degradation, something remarkable happened. She didn't break. She didn't lose her dignity. She found her voice. He gestured toward Maya, who sat with perfect posture despite the emotional weight of the trial. "The defense wants you to believe this was just a prank gone wrong, a family making a mistake. But the evidence shows this was part of a systematic campaign of dehumanization that affected hundreds of workers and stole millions of dollars." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with obvious emotion. "On the charge of conspiracy to violate federal labor laws, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of civil rights violations, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to defraud federal agencies, we find the defendants guilty." The gallery erupted in cheers and tears. Maya closed her eyes, feeling a weight she'd carried for years finally lift from her shoulders. David reached over and squeezed her hand. Judge Williams gavelled for order. "The court will reconvene tomorrow for sentencing. But I want to say now that the courage shown by Ms. Delacroix and the other witnesses has not only served justice in this case, it has exposed a system of exploitation that will now face the full scrutiny of federal law enforcement." Outside the courthouse, Maya stood before a forest of microphones and cameras. The shy housekeeper who had once been forced to crawl was gone, replaced by a woman who had found her power. "This was never about revenge," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the evening air. "This was about dignity, about proving that no one, no matter how wealthy, no matter how powerful, has the right to treat another human being as less than human." A reporter called out, "What's next for you, Maya?" Maya smiled, thinking of the scholarship fund that had been established in her name, the Worker Advocacy Center being built, the hundreds of domestic workers who had found courage to speak up because of her example. "What's next is making sure this never happens again," she said. "What's next is building a world where no worker has to choose between dignity and survival." As the cameras flashed and the crowd cheered, Maya thought of her grandmother's words one more time. They had tried to take her wages, her job, her reputation. But they had never taken her worth. And now the whole world knew it. The Maya Delacroix Center for Worker Rights occupied a renovated warehouse in downtown Atlanta. Sunlight streamed through tall windows onto a bustling space where legal aid volunteers helped domestic workers understand their rights, where English classes met in the evenings, where survivors of workplace abuse found community and support. Maya stood at the front of a packed auditorium addressing 200 domestic workers from across the Southeast. Behind her, a banner read, "Dignity is not negotiable." 6 months ago, I was forced to crawl on the floor of a mansion while wealthy people laughed and filmed my humiliation. She began. "Today, I stand before you not as a victim, but as proof that courage is contagious, that justice is possible, and that every worker deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." The audience rose in thunderous applause. In the front row, David sat with Rebecca Santos, both beaming with pride. The investigative series that had grown from Maya's story had won Rebecca a third Pulitzer and led to comprehensive federal legislation protecting domestic workers. The Ashfords received 15 years in federal prison, Maya continued. Their assets were seized and used to compensate the workers they exploited. But more importantly, their conviction sent a message that America will no longer tolerate the abuse of vulnerable workers. After her speech, Maya walked through the center, checking on programs and greeting staff. In the legal clinic, she found Elena Vasquez helping another domestic worker file a complaint against an abusive employer. Elena had become one of the center's most effective advocates. "How many cases this week?" Maya asked. 17, Elena replied with satisfaction. "And 12 successful settlements. Word is spreading. Employers know we're watching now." Maya's office overlooked the center's main floor. On her desk sat framed photos, her grandmother, the coalition of workers who had testified, a picture of herself addressing the United Nations about domestic worker rights. But the most treasured item was a letter from a young woman in Chicago who had found the courage to report abuse after seeing Maya's story. "You showed me that dignity isn't something someone gives you," the letter read. "It's something you claim for yourself." As evening approached, Maya locked up the center and walked to her car. The building that had once housed factories where workers toiled in dangerous conditions now served as a beacon of hope for a new generation of working people who refused to accept exploitation as the price of employment. Her phone buzzed with a text from David, now the center's legal director. "Dinner, I'm making my grandmother's pozole." Maya smiled, typing back, "On my way," as she drove through the city where she had once been invisible, where she had once been forced to surrender her dignity for survival. Maya Delacroix reflected on how completely her world had changed, not because someone had rescued her, but because she had found the courage to rescue herself. And in doing so, she had helped rescue hundreds of others. The viral video that was meant to humiliate her had instead become a catalyst for justice. The crawling that was meant to break her had instead become the foundation for a movement. The laughter that was meant to diminish her had instead amplified her voice to reach millions. In the end, the Ashfords had been right about one thing: the video had made her famous. Just not in the way they intended. Maya Delacroix had become famous for something they could never understand, for proving that true power comes not from wealth or position, but from the unbreakable human spirit that insists on dignity, demands justice, and never ever gives up.